How can I bring that out? How can I know what that means, who that person is? There are many ways to mindfully recondition our hearts and minds to see a person first as image bearers, but that's for another time, and also for the retreat coming up. But it is Black History Month, and it's the last Sunday of the month, and it would behoove me to explicitly draw attention to it, at least now. In general, we are people who do not like to rock the boat. I found that pretty much everywhere. There are some people who love to make arguments, but on the whole, most of us don't want to really, we don't want to offend somebody. We don't want to, risk the backlash. It's uncomfortable. It takes a lot of energy, and it's unpredictable. We can't know how a person is going to respond, particularly to a matter that's highly charged, that we have strong opinions about. Yet, if we do not challenge the status quo when things are unjust, when things aren't right, if we don't challenge that, nothing will change. And if nothing changes, well, everything changes. Since intentional effort is not being diverted to making things right and growing and becoming more of who we are and more truly who God has made us to be, image bearers, everything will fall apart. It is entropy. If we do nothing, we're not going to continue on the same road. We devolve. That's not how we're made. We're made to grow and be more of who God made us to be. And this is what Jesus seems to be getting at when he speaks about turning the other cheek, reframing the margins. Michael de la Torre, he's a professor at Iliff School of Theology and a beautiful human being. He wrote this book called Liberating Jonah, Forming an Ethics of Reconciliation, and it's a great book. It examines the Jonah and the whale narrative, and most of us, I would guess, do not know the fullness of the issues at hand in the story. Nineveh was the dominant culture, the dominant country. They were oppressors of Israel. But Jonah was an Israelite. He was a member of the people group to whom God spoke. They heard God's voice. They were in relationship with God. But these people, the Ninevites, oppressed them. Jonah knew that God is a forgiving deity, full of mercy, motivated by love. And that God's desire is to be in relationship with those whom God created, even the Ninevites. So when God asked Jonah to go to Nineveh to give him the message of what God's message was for them, he ran away. He was in the habit of being bitter and angry and resentful. His disposition was one of disdain toward his oppressors. And to do something about making it right might mean a kind of change that he was not ready to cope with at that time. Either they would lash out and kill him, right? Or they would repent and God would forgive them. Neither of those was tenable to Jonah, and he didn't want to have any part of it. Still, he didn't organize an army to obliterate them and win back their freedom. He didn't go and say, I'm sorry, I know you didn't mean it, but would you please reconsider our situation? No, he walked into the city and he confronted them. However, inelegantly, he said, 40 days and you will be overthrown. That was the message. And he didn't provide anything more because that's what God told him to say, and he wasn't going to say anything else. Jonah walked into the city as an instrument of God's righteousness and justice and mercy. He was present to them, even though he was reluctant, he was present to them, and in essence, turned his other cheek, presenting them a human being who has been marginalized and oppressed and represented by a God who loves. He came as this agent, this instrument of love. And Nineveh saw him as he was, a human being, a person who they oppressed, and they repented. Jonah was still in need of an attitude adjustment, if you know the story, but God was afforded the opportunity to be known through Jonah. So now we're seeing in situations like with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's a congressperson from New York. She's faced petty criticism, irrelevant jabs, and she responded not with anger, but with humor. Whether or not you agree with her politics, she is a fantastic example of other cheek turning. Instead of lashing out in anger or retreating into herself in fear of further criticism, she addresses it with humor. You can look it up, Google her name, or it's on the website here in my sermon. She continues to advocate and represent the people she was elected to represent. And it's so beautiful. I know when I get criticized, it's really hard for me to think of ways to respond in humor. It takes a lot, but if we get in the habit, if we are in the habit of encouraging one another to respond that way, it gets easier and we strengthen each other. Even if you or I are not overtly targeted for marginalization, underrepresentation, diverted resources, if I am for those who are, if I stand alongside those who are marginalized and ask to be shown the reality of the situation and, crucially, have eyes to see their situation, I might also become a target with them, even by those who I profess to be in solidarity with. Sometimes people misunderstand, and even those we want to be standing beside, wow, the wind is telling me to hurry up. But this is important. But if something is not right, if all are not treated with dignity and regard, I am in a position of power. And if you have any influence over anyone, you're in a position of power. You are. Whether you realize it or not. Open your spirit to God's Spirit on the matter, because unless you possess no agency, you have agency. And if something remains unjust in this world, it is human. It is God-given. It is essential to our very existence and being to address it. A skilled teacher will observe and guide, bring helpful information to the matter, and draw a diagram to show how to do something. A good teacher explains a situation in such a way that it is understandable, steps to take, how to proceed. I am not the most skilled at teaching. The spiritual gifting tending more toward the truth-telling end, truth-to-power spectrum. That's more of what I sense from the Spirit of God in me than outlining a plan, outlining a lesson plan. I'm not very good at that. But Jesus, Rabbi, is preeminent teacher and draws us a clear diagram for us here. Reframing the margins is about perspective.